Hello and welcome back. In this video, we want to create the gateway middleware function. Now, this function, what it does is simply to check if the request is coming from the API gateway. If it's not coming from the API gateway, then it's going to reject the request. Before we go further, let me just create the file. Okay, so create a file. You can call it gateway-middleware.ts. okay, and we need to import or install JSON web token. So npm install JSON web token. Okay, so install JSON web token. Here I can import JWT from JSON web token, and then we are going to need to import from Express. We need to import requests, response, and next function from Express. Okay, so now we've added these two lines of import. Now to explain how this is going to work. Normally, we understand that in JSON web tokens, we can save data to a token, okay? And it's going to encrypt the token. We pass in the required properties, the payloads, and what the properties we need to pass. And then we can verify that token to check if it contains the data that we expect it to have, okay? So the way we are going to implement this is that I'll create a list, const, I will just call it tokens. You can call it whatever name you want. It's going to be of type string, okay, and equal to an empty array for now. So these tokens here will contain the names of all the services where we are expecting to receive requests, okay, from the API gateway. So we're going to have auth service, we're going to have seller service, we're going to have gig service, we're going to have search, we're going to have buyer, then we're going to have message or chat or whatever you want to call it. We're going to have order, and then we're going to have review. Okay, now these properties, each of these properties, when a request is sent, if it's coming from the maybe it's authentication request coming from the API gateway, we are going to encrypt this or with JSON web token. Now I decided to use this to make it very simple. If it were to be maybe a reproduction application, probably you will decide to use something different. Maybe you can create a key, a base64 key or something that you can use instead of using these service names. Okay, so this here will be this. If it's coming from the API gateway to the auth service, we are going to check if the token contains this property auth. Okay, if it contains the property auth, then it will assume, okay, it's coming from the API gateway. But if it doesn't contain auth, then it will reject the request. Same for the seller or the gig service. If it's coming from the gig from the API gateway to the gig service, we'll check if this property exists in the token. If it does not exist, we reject the request. But if it exists, we allow the request to proceed. Okay, if it's a real application, probably then maybe you will want to use something different than this. Okay, but for now, this is just to check. And the API gateway, that is where we are going to implement. Okay, so here I'm going to create a function. I can export function. I'll call this verify gateway request, and I will pass in requests of type request, response of type response, and then next of type next function. Okay, and then this will return void, Okay, I have been asked about this, what it means. Okay, so in TypeScript, what this void means is simply that this function does not return any value. Okay, so if the function returns, for example, a number, say 1, then the return type here will be number. Okay, because I've gotten questions about this before. If it returns a string right here, if it returns a string, then the return type will be a string. If it returns a boolean, let's say true, then the return type here will be boolean. But if it returns a custom object, let's say you have your own object with name right here, as whatever, then whatever the interface or type is, that is what you are going to return right here. Okay, let's say for example you have interface I test and it's name of type string. Okay, so this here will return name of type string because yeah, the interface has the name property. Okay, so just for those that's mostly for beginners, for people that are just starting out. Okay, so here we are returning void because it's not returning any value. Now sometimes you might see something like this, promise void. Okay, that means the function is an async function. So if it has async, then you must use promise and then the return type. Okay, so now here we need to check if request.headers contain a property that we are going to send called gateway token. Okay, so if it contains a property called gateway token, because for every request, for every of the routes, we are going to add this method, and then in the headers we are going to check if the headers contain a property called gateway token, or rather if it does not contain. Okay, this is the first case. If it does not contain any property called gateway token, then we want to throw new not authorized error, and then we can pass our message. The first message will be invalid request, and then where is this coming from? I'll say you can add anything. You can say requests not coming from API gateway. You can add whatever text here to identify where the error actually is coming from, or you can say okay, verify gateway request method, request not coming from. Okay, so if the headers does not contain this property, then we return this error. Okay, and then if it does, we need to validate it or verify. So const token of type string equal to request.headers.gateway token. Okay, this gateway token property, we are going to set it when in the API gateway, so that when every request is going to any particular microservice, we are going to attach this gateway token property. Okay, and then here we say if, yeah, well, if no token. Okay, yeah, we still the same. We can still validate it here if you want. It's still the same as checking right here. Okay, so yeah, but let me just do this, throw new error. Okay, but if we have then try catch, I will use a try catch. So in the catch block here, I will say not authorized error. If you want, you can do a console log. Okay, if you want, you can do a console log so that you see the result in the console. Okay, so here I'll say invalid requests, and the message, yeah, you can still leave the same message, but here we need to verify. So I'll say const payload. The payload, we are expecting two properties, ID of type string and this property. I usually forget what these initials mean. They're usually coming from JSON Web Token. Okay, and jwt.verify we pass in the token. Okay, we pass in the token, and then we pass in the other property, which is the secret. Okay, now we don't have the secret defined. We are going to create the secret later, and that secret, we are going to use it throughout the whole application, in all of the microservices, from API gateway to our helpers and also to the different microservices. We are going to add this later. Okay, but for now it's going to be empty. And then here, so once we get a payload, okay, the payload will contain this ID property. Now the ID property should match one of these tokens defined here. Okay, so if it does not, so if tokens does not include payload.id, so that means if we get a payload but the ID here it's not included in this array, in this list, then we throw invalid requests. Okay, invalid request, you can give it whatever you want. Okay, you can say payload is invalid, or requests payload is invalid. Okay, that is just what we need to do right here. Okay, so if at first, if the request comes and there is no gateway token here or here, then we throw the request invalid, we throw this error. Okay, we reject the request, and then we do a try catch. If we have any error with maybe verifying the payload, we throw this error as well. But if we verify the payload and then we get a payload object, remember I said we are going to add this token later, so for now we just leave it as empty. And then the payload should consist of an ID and this property of type number from JWT. It just contains I think a value that contains the expiration dates and all that. Okay, and then we check, okay, the payload ID, does it exist in this list? Okay, if it does not exist in the list, that means the request is also not coming from the API gateway, and then we are going to reject the request. Now I said for the purposes of this course we are using this list right here. Okay, but if it's a real production grade application, you might want to do something different. You might want to use a different approach. Instead of just using this plain string, maybe you can create a separate repo for just these values, so, and then import it right here. Okay, so even if other users want to get access to this file, they wouldn't get access to these tokens. But for the purposes of this, I think it's fine. Maybe you can decide, instead of using auth on the API gateway and here, we are going to use maybe an alphanumeric key. Okay, so this is just all we need to do inside this function, and then we're already exporting it here. The next step will be to export it from our index file. So export from gateway middleware. Okay, so we created the function and here we have exported it.